Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit in September 21, where we're going to talk about two new cool projects that we're adding to the Open Security Summit for online threat modeling and the moldable development toolkits. And I'm joined by Tudor, which is going to also share some information about the project, and we're going to bounce some ideas. And we're actually going to start with a moldable development sort of project and idea, which I still have to say that I think the project that Tudor has been pushing on is one of the most, I think, undiscovered, amazing projects that it's out there, right? You know, it's a really great framework. It's a great way to think. It's like the next generation. It's one of those cases where the future has arrived, but is unevenly distributed, and we still need to find a good way to apply it in all sorts of different cases, right? But it's really, really exciting. So in a nutshell, basically what we're trying to do here is kind of a sort of this problem, right? If I go to Google, right, and I basically, if I want to find the stuff that, you know, we've been working on, where I can go, you know, development, right? It's kind of like there's a bunch of sessions, right? But it's completely, you know, scattered around. And if you go to the summit and you try to find this information, it's scattered, it's mixed within the past sessions we've done, it's in past things. And it's the same thing for the moldable development, but also for threat modeling. So what we want to do is we have this now idea of projects, and kind of projects, for example, the ASVS user stories, is the idea that we have this amazing content. We have great videos, we have great amount of sessions, we have people that have been involved in, you know, threat model, again, you know, we had some really amazing sessions. And this is only like a small subset of all the sessions that we have created, materials we have published, all the stuff that we exist, right? And the logic is, can we create an environment where we, you know, easily share information? Like, for example, like I want an environment that, you know, if I want to explain to somebody about what moldable development and the Glamour toolkit and all the stuff, yes, I know, you know, there's the main websites, but, you know, each organization, each entity tends to present things in a way where I think the summit can add a lot of value, because it can be very focused on the community. It can be very focused on actually, you know, answering the questions that, you know, people have when they go, okay, what is this? How does it work? How do I start, right? And in here, like, we already had like some pretty cool videos that we've been creating from these sessions that we basically had in the past. And what we kind of want to do is find a good way to present this. So we're now bouncing a whole number of different ideas. So one of the ideas is to create, for example, a smaller set of videos where we can have subsets of it, focus on one thing, we can highlight it, we can show content from other places, we can link to content from other places, and we can basically sort of answer the question, you know, what is this? And then create a community based on this information, based on Slack, based on other things that we can do to how can we collaborate the most. And in terms of just quickly where the data is stored, each of these pages, it's all managed by GitHub, because, you know, this is a static website built using Hugo. So you basically, each project get like a folder, and then here, the way you managed is through kind of attributes and information. So you can see here, we put the highlight videos, you know, we put the active members, and we can add all sorts of metadata here. Like, this is one of those things where we can really go to town and add, you know, all sorts of different things. We can add, actually, that's not the one I'm looking for. We can add, you know, for example, oops, that one. You know, let's say we want to have better information about the project. So you see here, like, for example, the videos, you know, this allows us to basically build a better page. So this is sort of, I would say, the first part where each, you know, for example, Tudor, from my point of view, like, the idea is that, you know, we should have all sorts of pages here, right? And you know, we're going to add, we have, you know, we're doing a lot of development work here. So we'll add to the website, for example, here on the page, maybe sub pages or content. So you can have FAQs and how to start and all sorts of guidance, and maybe specific videos with more information, you know, sample files, so we can link that. And, you know, the idea is that the project owns this folder here, right? You can do whatever you want and upload all sorts of content. And then eventually, if you need more space or other things, you could always have other repositories. So in this case, for example, the ASVS project, it actually has a really great content that is here that is then mapped, in in there. In fact, an interesting, maybe even example from the Glamorous Toolkit and the moldable development is how to take some of the stuff that you have here and then try to apply it in practice, right? I think it's really cool to try to do like a cross-fertilization of the projects. So fundamentally, the projects are just a way to build focus, build community, right? Try to engage everybody and try to create an environment where we can collaborate and we can basically, have sessions that then get amplified and that get the audience kind of, I would say, they deserve, right? And at the moment, the summit, has a problem because we create great content, but it kind of gets buried with a bunch of other sessions. So this allows us to, if you look at the projects, right, allows us to have control maps, OWASP, Kubernetes, risk and governance, threat modeling, worldly maps, etc. And each of these becomes a center of gravity in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And any comments or ideas or stuff that we could do here, or I'm sure there's a lot of content that you have that we'll be able to link, and ideas that you have on moldable development, for example, that we can leverage and create another place to drive traffic to those ideas and content, right?
Well, yeah, definitely. We are creating quite a number of those stories, and I think it's it's an interesting thing from a community perspective. Like concepts, they deserve to, and they probably need to start with their own name and their own identity, but eventually you want them to mix with the culture, right? You want them to be part of a daily communication, and that they should from an author's perspective, seeing others talk about how you want it and seeing it talked about it and maybe really, I'm not sure, but I think it's just I think that's maybe a natural thing, but it's the thing that prevents a concept from actually being adopted, right? Eventually, if something has value, then it has to be sustained by many other people that are not the original people, and then they have to be able to add value to it. So in the case of, for example, moldable development, we think we definitely take the stand that we only have the beginning of the conversation, but not the end of the conversation. And we want people to start from, here's a problem, here's how we decompose the problem, here's how we think about the problem, here are some solutions, because we create technology so that people can see it, but then eventually you want people to start creating their own or taking, using it in actual contexts that were completely unpredictable from the beginning. So from that perspective, I think growing a community is great. And I think that focusing on going through the experience of going from a community that want to embed this one into a larger scheme is actually also kind of healthy. Like also keeping us maybe a little bit more real or on the ground rather than in our own tiny bubble. So this would be interesting. Now, the question here would be, I think, one of the interesting things, one of the big challenges when it comes to moldable. So what is moldable development? Very quickly, moldable development is this idea that everything about software is data, but at the same time software is highly, highly contextual. So it's impossible to predict a specific problems about a system without knowing the system. You can only predict classes of problems. For example, you will know that there will be some sort of security issues, and you know that threat modeling is a technique or set of techniques that you can then apply on many different contexts, but you will not know what specific security problem a system will have. You have to be in the context of that system to know these things. So the only way to handle this is not an isolated problem. This is a generic problem. So the only way to handle this is by actually starting from the context and then building tools for it. That's the whole idea of moldable development. We think tools should be very, very cheap, but they are essential for software development. So people should build tools so that they can start telling stories about this. Now, the challenge with this is that the only way to teach this really is to start from a problem. The only way to teach this is to start from a context that the one that wants to learn has. So what would be an interesting platform, I think, would be one in which the problems come from people that want to learn, not only from the people that have learned it already. So kind of like, here's a problem, who would have a solution? Who would think, how would other people think about the solution here? And I think that could be an interesting, thing to add, and it will also lead to a more likely, a more organic way of growing. So having both contributors of problems and contributors of perspectives to those problems is case studies, right? So not only like a lot of the talks are just focused on, oh, here's an interesting case study. Here's an interesting case study of how we solve the problem, right? But what about those in which people struggle to just describe the problem? A lot of the solutions, it just comes from people describing problems. So having those would also be, I think, coming back to the original question, what could be an extra step there? I think focusing on those contextual problems that come from many different systems could be a very interesting area. I don't know exactly how that would be organized, but
yeah, and I think then we can organize sessions around that, right? We can, because fundamentally, right, isn't the concept of moldable development, again, using the stuff in front of us right now, right? It's this idea that you can't separate the creation of tools from the development of whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And because, and this is how I view it, right? Because of the efficiency gains that you get from implementing your toolkit as you develop, moldable development in this case is an insanely more effective way of doing it. And I think, for example, the reason I think I relate so much to this is because this is how I program. This is how I solve problems. I always solve problems, not just by looking at the problem, but by looking at what are the sub items and what tools can I build to help me to solve this problem, knowing that ultimately I say, this problem should be easy. It's not easy because I don't have A, B, C. All right, cool. So let me find A, B, C, build tools for that so that when I come here, right, I commoditize, right? So this is all about, if you look at the Worldly map, this is about productizing, commoditizing the problem that you have. So you move to a higher order of development, right? And I think that's an insane principle, right? Because I think we need a better way to represent the costs of not doing moldable development.
Yes.
Right. But I also, I'm involved in a couple of projects there where I can now really experience the advantages and disadvantages. And I also think it's important to sometimes determine what is the stage of the project.
Yeah.
Right. Again, on the Pioneer project, I think is almost criminal not to do it. In the Town Planner project, you need to make sure there's a funding, right, to allow you to improve how you do town planning.
Well, in a town planner,
settler.
In a settler, yeah.
And then in a town planner, it's almost by, if by then you don't have decent tools.
Yeah, you're not in a town planner then.
You're not efficient, right? So, but I think I think we need good ways to describe this, because I also feel that there's lots of industries that do this. There are lots of really good analogies that have internalized this idea that you don't separate the tool making from the practice, right? And there
are, but So there are, for example, if you look in construction, you will find that people will build scaffolding that are specific to the that is specific to the structure of the building, and it's not seldom that the construction of the scaffolding itself is a significant engineering undertaking. And that's an exciting part, right? Because at the end you only see the building, but it's the scaffolding that made the building possible. And that's super exciting. But so those scaffoldings, right? Those are like custom tools built for the purpose of constructing a certain structure at the end. But very rarely, there are not that many places which augment the ability of a human to reason about problems. There are places, like for example, sometimes you will see doctors construct, or surgeons construct specific tools so that they can enter to find a tumor through some channel that was not so common, and this is what leads to innovation, and that's a way to augment one's ability to reason about something, but nothing at scale, right? And here we're saying, what if all problems in software, and that's a unique opportunity, and it's also, that's why it's a bit, maybe it's a little bit uncomfortable. So, so there's one of the challenges that we find today is so we talk with companies that just to describe people, like talking about this cost. So maybe could you quickly go to Fink.com? There's a Wordly map there that would explain this a bit. Fink, F-E-E-N-K. F-E-E-N-K. E-E, double E. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So if you scroll down a bit, there's a Wordly map describing the, what we do with moldable development, right? So basically, the commoditizing that you mentioned here is going from these manual views. Those are manual inspection. Then the manual inspection is you do specific coding, and then this one translates the manual views on top to the generated custom views. So those manual views to those generated custom views, right? So this is the commoditization. This is how you commoditize. I know what you mean,
the commoditization, yes. Something like that.
Right, but there's these two terms that are always in my head, and I never know. I always get them wrong. So anyway, they become a commodity. And this is what you gain. This is how you augment your decision making, simply because you're eliminating a lot of waste that otherwise is not particularly useful for your decision making. But what we see people today is kind of the same thinking. So maybe 20 years ago, when people were talking about automating tests, right? We talking with managers, you would hear them say, "Oh, but we are already on the way to." It's not, it sounds like an interesting thing, but it's not a big deal because we're already kind of doing this. Because we are already, we already started automating our, test, the manual test reports, right? So we started to automate the work that the testers were doing, just the reporting of it, right? So because of that, right, there's going to be some sort of a marginal improvement, and because of that, there's no need for more automation. Maybe there's going to be some need for more automation afterwards, right? 10 years ago, maybe with continuous deployment, people say, yeah, that sounds like an interesting thing, right? Do you decrease the cost of a deployment? And but we are anywhere on the way to go from 1 time per year to two times per year of releasing. So it's already going to be like 100% improvement. So there's no need to go, to go further. Maybe afterwards it's going to be, I need to go further. But so, and then today we see, we see people, we've already built 5 rules somewhere, so there's no need to, maybe we'll, there's going to be some need for afterwards to build some more of those tools, but for now it's already a marginal improvement, so everything is fine, right? Because if the only thing you expect are marginal improvements, right, incremental improvements, then that's what you'll measure, and that's what you'll optimize for, right? So for tests, right, then people miss the opportunity. What happens once you start to create thousands of tests, what happens then, right? When do you create for every problem for every functional problem you solve, you create a test. What happens then? How do you think then? And then you have a whole new set of value that you extract. With continuous delivery, people said, right? What happens, the interesting thing is not that you decrease the cost of a deployment. The interesting thing is what happens as a business once you can start to test ideas on the fly at very low cost, right? But multiple development is yet another kind of a feedback loop. So the challenge here is how to communicate these significant improvements, right, to people that maybe expect marginal improvements, or that start from the perspective of, like just something that is measured in 10, 20, 50% is okay, and they never expect 10,000% or so, or 1,000% or so. So that's the key. So the answer there is that this is uncomfortable, or for me at least. The propositions, these kinds of propositions are uncomfortable because they also imply new skills. And learning new skills is not a particularly comfortable thing. So let's say, for example, learning a new language is already uncomfortable, even if you have learned many languages before, right? Learning a new language is still not entirely, but going and learning a whole new set of skills that you haven't exercised before is going to be even more uncomfortable. So the question is, like, for example, going from not testing to testing before you start writing code. This is incredible. Like, I still remember doing that. It was such an excruciating, it was painful, like absolutely painful for like a few days, right? But then you go past that and you're already in a different world. And that's an interesting thing. But how do you go people to go through that pain?
But here's an interesting thing, right? And I experienced this, right? Is that when you are comfortable, so I think there's two modes. There's a mode where you're using this for the first couple of times, and there's a mode where you're comfortable with what you can create, right? Like you can visualize. I think the challenge is that until you really get into that pattern, what you're asking the people to do is actually this. Right? Can you see my arrow?
Yeah.
So what you actually are saying is that I'm going to take your crisis and I'm actually going to make it worse in the beginning, right?
Yes.
Because I'm going to do a speculative investment, right? In this, right? Literally in that. But the problem that we have, and look, I feel this very acutely, is that when you're here, right? See when the blue dot is?
Yeah.
You actually are here. Because a lot of people can look at the Christ, right? And they're going, okay, I have a suboptimal, correctly said for you, way of dealing with it, right? But that, which is, let's say, in green here, right? But that's, or maybe yellow, right? But that suboptimal development, at least they understand, at least it's under their control. At least they can say, look, I'm going to move this crisis here, so I'm going to solve it. Let's say, to the right is solved, to the left is worse, right? So although my mode is inefficient, at least I can count on my inefficiency. At least I know that I can trust, and I can see movements in my inefficiency, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, I think sometimes the multiple development is that there's a moment where you actually are walking backwards, right? There's a moment where you actually, look, I used to draw this line to try to explain my world. I used to say, look, if this is a line, so I used to do this in security assessments, right? Where I would say, look, there's a way you can do it, right? You can kind of do a security, this is like when you find stuff, right? So you go here, you find a couple of things, etc. And then, so this is one way to do a security assessment, right? Now, what I usually do is I would do this. I would start the security assessment, right? And then, and this is the number of things discovered, right? And then I would flatline for all this time because I'll be building a whole freaking set of tools. But in practice, from a value proposition, right, you can actually argue that this line is actually coming down, right?
Right, exactly.
Because in practice, you spend 2 weeks of pen tests, but you still only have a certain number of findings, right? Now, what I then learned was that it was more efficient for me to build tools during the assessment to test the application I was testing, because
Exactly.
what will happen is I would go like this, yes, it would flatline, but then eventually I would go like that and
Yeah.
like that. So I would find insane vulnerabilities which only exist because I build that toolkit.
Exactly.
But I've also learned that it takes a lot of almost courage and political willingness
Yeah.
to basically, this is a gamble, because
Yeah.
it's a
It's a
gamble
gamble.
because there's a moment in time. So usually my big stress moments in here was in basically, this area here where you haven't hit the jackpot, but you actually are almost in negative territory. And the customer's like, where's my report? What have you found?
Right.
Is the thing secure? And you're like,
Right.
oh, give me another week, right? So, but I think this is something that we need to take into account where, I think in order to build a culture of multiple development, we also need to make it safe, right? To,
Yeah.
It's almost like not to bet the farm, right? Like on the toolkit, right? On it, where,
Yeah.
we start to introduce these practices almost in a way that is safer. So you don't need this massive jump, right? Into
Right.
this. It's almost like, your pioneers can do this, right? In the organization, they will do this mode. But
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
think what's interesting is, can we have a mode where, yes, now that this is packaged, actually, this becomes invisible to that world, right? So the next time
Exactly.
there's a crisis, they're using these toolkits that you've created, right? And then they start to ask questions. And then you go, okay, cool. But you see, that was just happened to be a view that, although it's very useful for you, it happened to be almost one of the things that we built in a previous engagement, but it's still insanely valuable to you. And then and then you start to bring the teams on board on how to apply those concepts. And I think, and this is why I'm also personally interested in this project, is I need a good, almost philosophical and scientific way to explain how I operate, because I operate like this. But but it's very hard to explain this to teams and individuals who have not done that paradigm shift, who have not have enough experience to know, look, I'm not going to do this thing 5 times. It's better for me to spend the next week or 10 or 2 days or whatever improving that, because if I keep doing what I'm doing 5, 10, 20, 30 times, I'm always going to have linear growth.
Yeah.
So,
right.
I mean, it's quite an interesting challenge, right? Of how to explain this and to find. I think we need to find examples, because I think that the only thing I would say about your world is that, yes, you walk in the walk, but at the moment you almost require people to adopt the Glamorous Toolkit, which is, again, is a big jump, almost as a first step, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, so like we have two hats, right? On the one hand, we are like Fink is a consulting company, or we earn money by doing, and they don't need to know about Glamorous Toolkit. We just use Glamorous Toolkit as our whiteboard, like pen and paper kind of thing. And so we just deliver what people need, and then it doesn't really matter how, right? So it's like it's like how you were saying with like isolating the world, like people don't see the plumbing, like this part here,
exactly,
right? Kind of that thing. So they don't see the red lines basically there necessarily. So but on the other hand, we have this other one, right, where we build the technology. The reason we build the technology is because we eventually want to educate. So first we want to learn what is possible, how far is it possible. So how many kinds of questions can you explain using the same simple routine, like techniques that you have learned, like learn a language and then you apply it many, many times over. And then how far can this go, right? And then because I'm very certain that, for example, Glamorous Toolkit will give you a way of decomposing this, and there will come others that will provide other ways. most of those things will be most of those yeah most of those things will be about, you know, similar concepts, but eventually somebody will create a new language or other languages that are maybe more interesting. So that's the reason why we're creating a technology. But there are two hands, right? So when we're trying to solve problems, we don't convince people to adopt technology because we tried this and it's hopeless. So that doesn't work. But on the other hand, right, when we're talking about community, there we do want to give people something to play with, because we think that this is how they can learn. But then there is the other side of the community, which we are not yet building that much, which is about just describing problems. Just focusing on the kinds of problems that people have.
Well, and something like this, right? Like I think this is exactly like, you know, if you look at this, right? The only difference with the moldable toolkit is the step is option B is actually, right? First option is, you know, almost like, you know, identify, right, the needs, right, to have, you know, a saw, right? Then is create the saw, right? And then is use the saw, right?
Yeah.
And you do that, you know, there, right? So when I think of the Glamorous Toolkit, I think what the Glamorous Toolkit is coming along and realizing I need to cut a tree. I don't have a saw for this tree, or maybe cutting a tree bad enough. I need to do this. I'm going to create the tool. So I'm going to identify the tool. I'm going to design it. I'm going to create it. I'm going to create the first almost VP, viable product for that particular thing, and I'm going to use it. And it's still going to be more efficient than to do it by hand.
Right. Yeah. Right? No, I agree. Exactly. No, that's exactly what it is, especially, but it's just that very often, right? So the biggest problem here, here's already a great, you know, a great metaphor. But here is still about the visible side. Like I want to cut that tree. That's my goal. So I want to cut that tree, but so I will measure. I will you know, slice the axe. Maybe a step further would be, okay, before I you know, I sharpen my saw, I will first say, oh, from which side will I tackle the tree? Because I'll first have to measure, depending on whatever, and so I'll have to construct a tool that will measure from which side do I do it, or is it better to have two people or one person or whatever. Mm-hmm. So kind of like this, because like there's this with moldable development, we're tackling this even more insidious problem, which is like it doesn't exist, right? Like how do you know what is the problem? Like people want to solve, like here's a solution, great, let's build that solution. But before you build the solution, you have to first know what the problem is. And that's the difficult, or it's not difficult, but it's difficult to convince people that this is where the waste happens. Yeah, because that's where when people start reading
this is where I need to peel you off from the ceiling, right? I peel you off from the sky and bring you down to earth, right?
Yeah.
Like the bottom line is that I would rephrase what you said like this, right? Without applying moldable development, you know, solving problems the way you're describing, where you have unknown problems and you're figuring out how to solve things for the first time, is not possible, right? So I think the path to create amazing things, in fact, history has shown that the people who create amazing things end up creating the tools to create those amazing things, right? And mobile development is exactly the way to do that. But I think the problem is that, we need to build a community that even can understand that, because even this sounds insane for somebody who wants to go for option A. You know what I mean? Yes. Like, you're talking about option Z, right? Or option G after B, C, D. It's almost like you talk about the meta environment. Now, I agree with you, and that for me is what really fascinating. In fact, I feel blessed to have experienced some of those moments where the toolkits allow me to have a level of productivity and a level of acceleration that is insane, right? But even, I have to put myself in almost like the zone for a while to get there. but I think that, we know, that is not even on the map, right? For a lot of like, I can't even get my team to adopt the model development workflow. Might as well what you're talking about. So I'll be more than happy if the world that I live in is a world where everybody, before they say, how can we solve this, they say, okay, here's the problem. What technology, what tools we need to figure out in order to solve this in the most effective way, right? And I think if we can do that, that's already a major evolution from the status quo today, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just wanted, so there's another point, right, which is I completely agree. But there's one other point here is that, so the reason we're rather bullish on applying our tools on very concrete cases, because we think that we have to, create this theory by being there and getting our hands dirty and living with it, at least living with some sort of consequences of our decision, like of the outcome. So, but there is one thing that we learned from this, and this is hard. We find it hard to communicate. People find that because we are so trained, like that the market developed in such a way that every new activity, every new different activity, like, oh, you want to monitor blah, 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 go to this tool. You want to monitor something else, go to this other tool, right? So every action will require you a significant, like the same kind of, oh, now another tool and another tool and another. So I'll have to learn 1,000 tools. Like how many tools can one understand, right? There's like, I'm limited to 50 items I can put in my head. That's it. So I will always be only able to use 50 things. That's it. So the only question is which 50. So, but then there is the other way in which you're saying, well, what if there is a language that you can learn in which you can decompose any of those problems that come in? It doesn't matter at which level of abstractions those problems come in. For example, in our case, Glamorous Toolkit is developed using following moldable development, which means that, and there, like even in Glamorous Toolkit, we have to put something on a screen, we actually have a graphical stack. The graphical stack is new and has new interesting properties. So, but to build the graphical stack, we have tools that visualize, and so, like performance, to visualize if there are memory leaks, to visualize what is the memory management, to visualize, I don't know, all sorts of things that happen there. So we are actually talking about we are 2 or 3 levels of meta up, way beyond, like, to build Glamorous Toolkit, which is the tool that will help people solve their concrete problems. So, and in all of these cases, we use exactly the same tools and techniques. And the reason this is interesting is, and of course, like, I'm not trying right now to convince people that this is, that's the reason we're doing this is to show that is the only way the solution to the problem of understanding systems will scale. If it's only going to work if we're going to have a systematic way, a repeatable way, systematic way to deal with all the kinds of problems that will appear in context. There is no other way around this. And this is why the work we're doing is just dealing with all of these layers, so that we are sure that this kind of promise actually holds. Whether people will get to this, in the first week or in the first 10 years, I don't know. But at least when we make a statement, we want to ensure that we have seen it work. So this is why I'm saying, but yes.
It works because you have experienced it, right? You have personal experience in developing the moldable toolkit in the Glamorous Toolkit, in using the Glamorous Toolkit, right? And using the model development. So that's why you believe, right? You believe because you've seen the difference, you've seen the value. Yeah. You know that bug would have not been fixed, would have not been discovered as fast as it was. Do that. But here's the thing, right? When you apply what you just described, one of the side effects of operating like that should be a large number of mini tools. And those mini tools should be usable by others. And that's almost how you start to convince. That's how you start to change the world. Is that a lot of, I think, the early users, it's kind of like you build a freaking black belt, right? You build like a Formula One car, right? Where you go, if you want to run at that speed, at that stuff, that's what you need, right? The problem is a lot of people can't even drive, right? A lot of people want to change the tire. And you're like, I build the most freaking efficient way to build tires, super optimized. I can change it in 5 seconds, right? A lot of people take 10 minutes to change a tire. But the bottom line is that your 5-second workflow, if you can be repackaged for somebody to use it in a minute versus 10, then they start to understand. And I think that's what's needed, because also I think organizational, that's how we work well. Like, so I think, in the organization I'm now leading, right? For me, the way to introduce this is to create a group that behaves like that. And actually that group of development of practice should have a productivity that is off the charts, right? Because again, if it doesn't, right, something is wrong, right? It's not applying this, right? But that group responsibility would also be to create all sets of tools that others use. Like you said, you created almost an ecosystem of scaffolding, right? Around the Glamorous Toolkit. Now, every one of those needs to start to gain its own life, right? And that's again the beauty of open source, is that you might not care about that because you solved your problem, but you should be seeding this constant stream of ideas, tools, stuff.
Exactly.
And you go, hey, if somebody uses one of those tools to add value to their world, the good news is that in most environments, right, when you pick a new tool, you very quickly reach its limitation, right? So you have this massive amount of value, and sometimes the value either flattens or even starts to lose a bit because you start to hit complexities for the own tool or the system that you bought. So though you might get value, sometimes it backfires. Do you see what I mean, right? So you adopt something, you get value, but sometimes it either grows a little bit linear, like you peaked the value you can get from it, maybe because it doesn't have enough features, maybe because you use as much or whatever, or it actually introduces other complexities they now have to deal with, right? What I like about this moldable concept is that when you hit the block, you go, oh, okay, now you need to tweak it. And the tweaking is not like an extra feature. It's almost by design.
It's built in.
Now, it's almost like you have to be looking at the photograph of the 3D model, but actually the 3D model is just behind the scenes. So you can go and change it and take another photo, and then you get something else. And I think that's the pipeline that we want to see here, where there's an almost like the advanced group that lives in that moldable world. It spits out a bunch of tools that it uses, and actually it's good for that group to have somebody maintaining all those things, because or else again, you can slow down, because then you have to maintain not only what you're building, but also all the toolkit around it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's a sweet spot here, where I think like there's a lot of stuff that you showed that I think I really want to start exploring, just taking one of them and just, what is the pattern that you've used here? Like, what was the problem that you solved there? And you solved the problem with the Glamorous Toolkit, and it allows you to do it in this amount of time, because you have, again, you're building on top of other tools. But that problem occurs with a bunch of other places, right? So can we then find ways to either take the stuff that you do or variations of it, which again, you'll benefit eventually, because the patterns can be, it's the irony here is the Glamorous Toolkit would always be faster and more adaptable to adopting anything else that somebody else creates, because by design, it's an evolving system, right? So, but I think that the proof of the pudding here becomes, if you don't have a long tail of mini tools and experiments, the system is broken.
Exactly.
Right? And I think we need to start seeing that.
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying, right? If you look at, with continuous delivery, right? You don't want to know when you don't want to know when you're releasing. Like, this should just happen. It should be such a routine thing that you cannot name your releases, right? That's the thing, right? So people used to, you say, like, if you look, for example, at Apple, right? they're going to name the OS release, right? Because it's like it comes every year. They'll have names for those. Like if you look at the system, like I don't know, like yours, right? I'm sure you don't have names for every release you put out there, because there are just too many, right? So you cannot, you don't have the time.
Something like this, right?
Of course.
So for example, if you look at this, I think this is really interesting, the way Chrome does releases, because they do exactly that. You can totally see, right, them doing that, right? Because the releases, where the hell is it, right? There's a really cool mapping that, you know, talks about the versions. Yeah, like this, you can see, right? Version,
right.
version.
Right. But this is like version, right? These are numbers, not names.
But each version is then made of, look, see, features. So it's a combination of that, right? So, and they already look in the future. So basically the next step, so the stuff that is here was there before and now it was there, right? So each of these becomes a feature that then goes into a release that is tracked, that is mapped, that has, you know, so they've done that commoditization, right? So they don't care the number, they just keep releasing them as
exactly.
Clockwork,
they just go on.
Right. And each of the feature, you know, a feature might go very quickly from one to the other, or might be a long time in beta, right? Might be a long time here because it hasn't evolved, it kept finding problems, etc. Right. So I really like this because there's a lot of science behind it, right? And they commoditize fundamentally the release process, right?
No, yeah, absolutely. So, and that's what I'm saying. So, like, usually, like the same with tools, right? If you can name your tools, if you can name the individual tools that you're using for specific problems, you have too few of them, right? If you just have to have, there's so many tools, you need so many tools that you can't name them, right? They should be commodities, right? That's what.
You still need a name, right? Like you still, you know, what you're saying is that I would say that, you know, I think the analogy I would use is that we start with, it's like a toolbox, right? So it's almost like, you know, if you imagine that environment where the person has a set of tools, right, in the shed, right? It goes from screwdrivers to this to that. It's like a whole wall of this, right? Yeah. And the mobile toolkit is say, when you arrive, you have nothing, right? Yes. And then as you go along, you start to create just the right tools that you need. And in the end, you end up with this super productivity because you have all this stuff to do, right? And actually, there's another thing that sometimes I think you can talk about, which is the irony here is that ultimately it's more productive to build the tool than to not build a tool, right? Absolutely. In the scheme of things, there's a mode where once you get into the groove and once you get a culture, it's actually faster, more efficient, cheaper, right? To actually sometimes take this journey than to take again the journey that's, it's safer, but it's, it doesn't have the optimizations, right?
Exactly. So that's the reason why, for example, we have a business in the first place, because we can. So let's say if we take the legacy system, for example, which is one of the kinds of things we work with, within the amount of time that is usually allocated to just onboard a new developer, we are already able to take their problem and then transform it into give them the views that will change their mind about their own system. So, and this is without having any specific training from them. We just go in and we do what we do. Yeah, and the reason this works, we're basically competing. We're competing, right, with people that have maybe a decade experience on that system. So this is the reason why this works. And it works with a significant delta there. Yeah, right? So there's no doubt.
Yeah, but it works because the analogy here is that you arrive with the laptop that you can write code on, and you land in a world where they're using pen and paper to do calculations, right? Calculators, right? So imagine you go back 20 years with even a basic laptop, right? Not only do you have an experience, you can take problems and you create a spreadsheet and you can program that spreadsheet in a way that, the other people don't have. But that's not the real world, right? Now that makes you competitive because not only you are already probably more experienced and have a lot of it. In fact, you have a lot of experience in understanding complex problems and breaking apart. You arrive with with a freaking toolkit, right? Like when I was younger, if you remember Sports Billy, right? That's what you have. You reach your hand and you and even better, not only you have a set of toolkits, you can create new ones on the fly.
Yeah,
right?
that's an interesting thing.
And I think that's amazing. And in a way, you're able to use that to fund the development and to share, right? Which is great. And you are living proof that the model works, right? But I think we need to find ways that it gets used by wider teams.
Absolutely.
Again, it's all about, and this is something I learned from Worley Maps, is that sometimes what gets commoditized is not the full version, is not the version with the most features, is the one that works reliably, that is good enough to a wider audience. That's what gets commoditized, right?
Yeah. Yes. No. So exactly. So what we know now is we're now satisfied with let's say the amount of with the kind of research that we have, and we know we are squarely focused on how do we educate, right? And then we very much would be interested. We very much would be interested to partner with anybody that is willing to spend the time and energy to help propagate the message.
Well, look, the biggest, right?
Yeah, exactly. This brings us full circles back to the original problem. So that's our motivation. That's where we stand. We definitely think that people should learn this. We know that there is a learning curve. We have lots of experience indeed, but eventually, for this one to fly, and we think it has to. We wanted to work and find the messaging, find the way to teach this in a way that is, will not take a year for somebody to learn, but and also to teach. So, and we know that this is also a big challenge. This is not a tiny challenge. So we're not naive about that.
Yeah. So look, I think the next step is let's start adding some content, right? I feel that this can work quite well because you got already a bunch of content. I want to spend some time with the summit sites to really make it easy to allow that to happen. And I think what we need to do, so we're going to have another summit in 2 months from now in November. Let's start thinking about the types of sessions. So it was almost like, let's take the next month to put some content into this, to start to understand. I really want to break down, so even today, like there's some, Adam is going to help a bit, right? Like there was a couple of moments today where you gave a great explanation about Moldable Toolkit. There was another one. So I kind of want to take that 5 minutes, that 3 minutes, and then just propagate it, right? And then generate energy, and then think about what are the topics that we can bring to the next summit session, really in terms of like round tables. I feel there's some interesting avenues to explore where, other uses of this concept in other industries, or how can we translate some of this stuff into what people are already doing, so I think there's some interesting ways to slice this and to maybe have some practical sessions, right, on how to do it. So look, let's spend the next month bouncing off ideas, because I want to find a way to also explain to my team these concepts. I feel that I sometimes have the problem that, and when I said I'm working with some others, we develop stuff that it's so out there that they only see the end results. And they might go, well, that's really cool, but it's very hard to explain. No. That is literally just the final one. That is just a small subset of what's possible. And they go, yeah, this is awesome. Let's use this. I'm like, yeah, but what I really want is you guys to adopt the practice of this.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm getting to the point where I'm getting adoption in that tail of tools that we create, but I really want the pattern to be understood, right? And that's why I feel like it's interesting to think about ways to visualize this, ways to create diagrams that explain this, so that we have, other people going, yeah, I want to work like that. So
Sounds good.
cool, man.
Let's do that.
All right, there you go, right on the hour. So let's continue. This is the beginning. Again, in the moldable development, we're making a toolkit, right, to help to share stuff, right? And I realize just the web page is the beginning of that packaging of goods, right? So
right.
Cool, man. Look, thanks. Thanks for participating. And
Thanks for having me.
see you guys. So.